So there's a great degree of media interest, not just Indian news media or Pakistani news media. Certainly international news media has been glued to the India-Pakistan story, the terror attack that happened in Pahalgam and subsequently the military action that India took, and then the escalation that happened over the last 3 days, and finally the de-escalation over the weekend. So a lot of international news media have been reporting about it, have been covering the story, have been interviewing important personalities who are right in the thick of the action. One such person is the Sky News journalist Yalda Hakim, who's now joining us. Thank you very much, Yalda, for joining us here on CNN News 18. I know you're joining us from Saudi Arabia. You're covering President Trump's visit there, so thank you for taking the time out. I want to start off by asking you, what drew you to the India-Pakistan conflict situation, as it were? I know your family originally is from Afghanistan, so you're from this part of the world, if I can use that phrase. But really, in terms of a news story, what drew you to it? What was so fascinating about it for you to cover as a journalist?
Zakka, thank you so much for having me on your program. As you say, I mean, the region has often interested me. I've covered stories from India, from Pakistan, from Afghanistan for many years, from the very beginning of my journey as a journalist. But I think beyond that, this was and remains an incredibly important story that I feel that, frankly, Western media continues to miss and doesn't quite understand. They don't understand why Kashmir is such a flashpoint. They don't understand why it is such a hot topic for both India and Pakistan. And beyond that, the fact that you've got two nuclear armed rivals that could be at the brink of war. I think even in this instance, what is now alarming, which is being again missed by Western capitals and their leaders, is the fact that certain red lines have now been crossed and that baseline has now moved, which means the next time there is a flashpoint, we are going to have those lines across yet again, and it could become even more dangerous than, frankly, this time round from 2019 and the various other moments where there has been conflict. But my main frustration in my newsroom, whether it was at the BBC or at Sky News, frankly, is a real lack of fully grasping the importance of this this conflict, not just for the region, but the entire international community.
It's interesting you said that every time there was a terror attack and there was subsequent military retaliation by India, the envelope was pushed a bit more. The chain of escalation went up a bit more. And so was the case now as well. Traditionally, it was always thought that two countries that have nuclear weapons, will not attack each other because that's the ultimate form of deterrence, if you will. But over the last 3 or 4 instances, has India sort of changed the game or moved the envelope in a way that Pakistan cannot use these terror proxies and hope or imagine that there will not be a retaliation or there won't be a consequence, or take refuge behind the nuclear weapons and say, India can't hit us because we have the nuclear weapon?
I think it's a little bit of both. I interviewed Ambassador Amar Sinha very early on after the Pahalgam terrorist attack. And at the time, he said that, we can't continue to be told that there will be this nuclear threat and therefore we can't take action and that we have to tolerate a terrorist attack on Indian soil time and time again. And I think that it's one of those things where what is most concerning is that not only is Pakistan a nuclear armed state, which of course India is too, but it also does have this policy, for those who know Pakistan's history and its relationship with terror organizations, backing them, funding them, supporting them, giving sanctuary to terrorist organizations, whether it was in Bahawalpur or other parts of the country in the tribal belts. They have done that for decades. And I think what's often missed is because Pakistan comes out and denies these, it is often bought by journalists and, frankly, diplomats around the world. The United States spent decades giving billions of dollars to Pakistan in the war against terror, knowing that they were providing sanctuary for these terrorist organizations. And so the finger of blame is often pointed at India for taking action off the back of one of these attacks. And I think that, there is huge difference between India and Pakistan. India is now a great power, and Pakistan is a weaker power, and it is still finding itself not cracking down on these terrorist groups. And fundamentally, that is the issue. But these are questions that aren't necessarily asked of Pakistani authorities.
So when you did ask that, and now it's become an interview that's gone viral, internationally, when you did ask that to the Pakistani defense minister, and he said pretty nonchalantly, I thought, that that's what we've been doing all along. That's what we've been doing, this dirty work for the United States and for the West for the last 30 years. When he said that, what was running through your mind? Did you feel like a gotcha moment?
The first time I heard Pakistani authorities say this, I was at two instances before this defense minister's interview. One was when President Hamid Karzai had made a trilateral visit to Islamabad with then Asif Ali Zardari as the president of Pakistan, and Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, was there as well for this trilateral talk. And I stood up and I asked the Pakistani authorities about the double game that they were playing. And at that time, there was a sort of flurry at this particular press conference because you were just supposed to ask, very cordial questions of all of the different leaders who were there. So there was frustration at me for asking that question. The second time I asked was when I interviewed General Pervez Musharraf, and at the time he was a retired general living in exile, and he said to me, yes, we use them as proxies. It shocked me, but it didn't generate any kind of news because the timing and because he was retired, and he was sort of saying it in passing. I think what shocked me this time round was that the current defense minister of Pakistan, at a moment where the country could be at the brink of war, off the back of the Pahalgam terrorist attack in Kashmir, when I asked him this question, I thought they would go through the normal process of denial. So I think I was quite shocked. In that moment, I sort of didn't know how to take it. And I just wanted to give him even time to clarify, because I actually thought he misunderstood my question. He went further on to sort of confirm what he'd actually said to me.
So why do you think, and you referenced this in your previous answer as well, it's not just against India that Pakistan has used these terror groups and terror proxies to target Indians, but they've used this against Afghanistan as well. Why do you think then the international community has given such a long rope to Pakistan and not held it accountable for this? Because any other part of the world, if a country had been doing this as almost like a policy for the last 20, 30 years, they would have been held to account. Why then hasn't it happened with Pakistan?
And when you look at the number of incidents, Zakir, I mean, you look at the murder of Daniel Pearl in 2002, an American journalist in Karachi. Just weeks earlier, he had reported on the fact that terror camps and madrasa seminaries were flourishing, despite the Pakistani authorities saying that they were launching crackdowns on them. When you look at the billions of dollars that have been invested in Pakistan in the so-called war on terror, when you look at the fact that Osama bin Laden was discovered by Pakistan's ally, the United States, Navy SEALs was sent there in an operation that was completely secret. I mean, when you're giving a nation billions of dollars, they're fighting terrorism with you, and yet you're too afraid for the information to leak to the authorities, and in secret you enter Pakistani soil and you kill a known terrorist that is known to be behind 9/11. I mean, that in itself was quite extraordinary, and in that moment, big questions should have been asked of Pakistan. Why is this man this terrorist, this known terrorist, being given sanctuary just a few kilometers away from a major military installation and headquarters? It wasn't until 2018, when President Donald Trump was surrounded by a number of people who fully grasped and understood the Afghan-Pakistan file and understood and you'll remember that Donald Trump surrounded himself by a number of 3- and 4-star generals at the time who'd fought and operated in Afghanistan, so they knew firsthand what Pakistan was doing, and they encouraged President Trump to take away military aid from Pakistan. And then, in the years after that, there was a threat of putting Pakistan on a grey list, the Financial Action Task Force, of a state sponsor of terrorism. And then they sort of took certain action, arresting certain jihadis and terrorists, putting them in prison. So Pakistan has had this long history, and yet, as you say, it's baffling that to this day, whether it's Washington or London, haven't been able to, other Western capitals haven't been able to hold Pakistan to account for having that policy.
All right, one final word, and I think you also started off by referring to this about the frustrations about international media not getting the scale of this conflict or how much it could escalate. One of the frustrations here in India, certainly within government, maybe even amongst ordinary Indians, is that the Western media it doesn't quite get India's point of view when it comes to this issue, because they still, parrot a very old narrative that Kashmir is a disputed thing, and it's between India and Pakistan, and so on and so forth. Whereas for India, for the last 20 years, certainly, the fundamental issue has always been about terrorism, and somehow it feels like the Western media narrative does not portray India as the victim and Pakistan as the perpetrator, but more like, this is a historic dispute and these two are equals, and there is a degree of hyphenation, if you will. Is that a valid concern, and how can that concern be addressed?
I think that, to my earlier point, that India, its economy, where it stands now on the international stage, this extraordinary partnership that we've seen for the last 25 years between Washington and Delhi, this bipartisan partnership that they have developed. And we've seen Prime Minister Modi was one of the first leaders to go to Washington and meet with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. So there is an understanding of Delhi's importance, certainly when it comes to the rivalry with China as well. And yet I think that Delhi, India, hasn't necessarily done a very good job in highlighting the issue of Kashmir and the issue of terrorism in Pakistan enough, frankly, because I think in many ways, India is a population of 1.4 billion. It sort of focuses internally on its internal affairs and issues. And then when a flare up like this happens, it sort of takes certain measures, and the world is quite confused about why it's come to the brink, not fully understanding what was the underlying issues under the surface. And so one of the things that I've sort of said in previous interviews is we don't often hear from, Indian officials talking about these things, not just in this period where there's a flashpoint, but in other times as well. And to be fair completely to Pakistan, they are willing to put up their defense minister, their interior minister. They're willing to come to the cameras, regardless of how the interviews end up and the accusations. They're willing to take the tough questions and deal with it. And I think that is one of the things that perhaps culturally is a difference between India and Pakistan.
All right, Yalda Hakim, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for this fascinating conversation, and thank you for what you've been doing through your work, through your journalism, in highlighting this flare-up between India and Pakistan. As you said, an issue that many in the West may not necessarily care about. Thank you.
Thank you so much.